Waddell, and I'm a sociologist. As a sociologist, one of the things that I'm most interested in is the systematic study of society. Now, what does that actually mean? Well, if you think about analysis, what analysis is the examination of a particular structure. And for social scientists like myself, what we're interested in studying, what we're interested in systematically examining, is society itself. And so as a sociologist, I'm interested in thinking about analyzing the structure of our society. Because more often than not, what influences human behavior is the structure around them, right? It's the spaces that we live in, the neighborhoods, the towns, the cities, that influence how we act, what we do, where we decide to work, how we decide to interact with others, whether we're aggressive, non-aggressive, etc. So we study society systematically as a means of better understanding society. Once we understand society through our analysis, we can inform public policy. So sociology is interested in those things. Social scientists in general are interested in the analysis of society and then informing the public policy that helps us move forward and progress as a society. Now, there are two different forms of analysis that I want to talk about today. I want to talk about qualitative data, which is actually getting close to people, hearing their stories, trying to understand where they're coming from and what is leading them to do what they do in their daily lives. What drives their daily patterns? That's qualitative data. Quantitative data is actually putting categories to people and groups across large swaths, right? Large areas, nations, entire states, the world, etc. And so when we think about quantitative data is a great example is the US Census. Every 10 years, the United States government sends people out to actually study the dispersion of people across geographic space in the United States. The US Census is interested in understanding who lives where, what they're doing, how they're employed, whether they're employed at all, whether they're using public assistance, whether they have children that are in local schools. There's a lot of questions, right, wrapped up in the US Census. But they're questions that can be quantified. And so you can go to the US Census and you can see results that tell you how many people are employed in the United States in a given census tract. You can see how many people live in homes that make over 60,000 or 70,000 or 90,000, right? So you can really get down to the details of quantitatively what our nation looks like through the US Census. But the US Census isn't going to tell you why the people in those results do what they do. That's the job of qualitative data. And so good sociological analysis or good social scientists look at both of these things, the qualitative and the quantitative. They bring them together, which is called mixed methods research. And they use that mixed methods research to inform the way they think about human behavior in society. So that's what we're going to be trying to do today. I'd like to get us started by telling you a story. This is a story about the first time that I ever traveled abroad. I remember the first time I ever left the country. It was 2004. I was about 22. I had never gone outside the United States. And I boarded a plane. I remember the plane left from San Diego, and then we flew into Miami. I spent the night in the Miami airport, and the next morning I got on a plane destined for Nicaragua, where I was going to spend the next 6 months. This was part of an undergraduate study abroad program. During that experience, in that first month that we spent in country, we went to what is essentially a jungle. We went to rainforest. Now, in Nicaragua, although not as large as Brazil, there are several different rainforests. Indio Maíz, Bosoas, and several others peppered throughout the country. Nicaragua has the largest rainforest outside of the Amazon in the Western Hemisphere. So it's a big deal, right? I was going into forests that represented an important oxygen source for the entire planet. I remembered as we were going into the jungle, my second and third grade teachers talking about the importance of preserving the rainforest because of the deforestation that was taking place on the ground. And I remember as we got closer and closer to the people that were active in deforesting these spaces in Nicaragua, I wondered to myself, what is leading these people to do what they do? And what I got over the next week was story after story after story of individuals who were barely making it. They were individuals that were just getting by. From day to day, they weren't sure if they were going to have enough food for tomorrow. These were individuals that were clear-cutting forests and selling the wood to larger lumber operations that were then exporting it to the United States. And then that wood, hardwood, an old growth forest, was ending up in stores like Home Depot and Lowe's and other major corporations across the United States and Europe. And so I remember as I was hearing these individual stories, what they were telling me is that the wood that they were harvesting and selling downstream, and the cattle that they were growing on that land afterwards was all connected to this larger supply chain. It was connected to the United States. It was connected to my consumption habits. It was connected to your consumption habits. And so all of a sudden I started to see this bigger picture. And yet, when I looked around me at this massive jungle, it seemed as if the devastation I was seeing from an environmental perspective in this one place, this place happened to be called Pueblo Nuevo, the new village, that devastation seemed minimal compared to the vastness of the jungle. And so it seemed to me as if it couldn't really be having such a large effect on our environment. Sometime later, we went all the way to the Atlantic coast, and we went by land. And so we took a bus 8 hours, we got up at like 4 in the morning, went 8 hours inland to a place called Muelle de los Bueyes. And just beyond that, there's a little village called Rama. We get to Rama, and we get onto a small boat called a panga. That boat takes us for 4 hours through the jungle-clad river, and eventually show up in Bluefields. From Bluefields, we went back inland, and we went to rural villages that were, again, part of this devastation. And I saw, again, what I'd seen in the interior of the country. I saw deforestation, I saw massive cattle operations, I saw monoculture production of things like palm, which is used to create, palm oil and things of that nature. But still, it didn't seem on the ground as if that devastation was that big, as if it were something that were going to impact negatively our entire planet, our global community. Well, we went by bus and river to the Atlantic coast, but we flew back. And it was when we flew back that I started to understand the depth of devastation that was taking place on the ground and how it impacted the larger global community. As we got into that plane, which only fit 12 people, the pilots, there was one point where the pilots are actually like this, relaxing on autopilot, and they're literally right there. I was sitting right behind a pilot. And so, I could have grabbed the controls of the plane. The plane was so small. And so we're skipping across the country, and all of a sudden, for the first time, I see the jungle that we had been in from above. I see it from 15, 20,000 feet above the earth. And all of a sudden, I start to see the patterns. I look down, and what I see is this massive deforestation that's taking place. And you see pocket after pocket after pocket of settlements in which people are clear-cutting the forest and putting cattle into what used to be jungle. And all of a sudden, that picture that my second and third grade teacher painted for me became clear. We were living in a moment in which the consumption trends in the United States and Europe and other parts of the highly developed world were devastating people on the ground in places like Nicaragua. And it was clear to me that what I had seen was what was going on in the Amazons, so what was going on in Peru and Bolivia, Indonesia, and other parts of the world. All of a sudden, the bigger picture became clear to me. So the qualitative stories that I heard, those were important because it helped me understand the causes, helped me understand the why. Why were these individuals doing something that might ultimately be bad for all of us? And then when I saw it from above, I saw the how big, right? The how big in terms of how big was the impact. I could see it so clearly. For the first time in my life, I could understand the massive devastation that our consumption trends in the United States were causing. It was encouraging people to decimate the very thing that we depend on to create oxygen, which allows us to continue living on this planet. And so for me, that story always stuck with me. It explained the importance of quantitative data, large trends, and it helped me understand the importance of qualitative data, individual stories. Because without both of those, it would have been impossible to understand the larger picture, which is, if we want to solve this issue, it's not enough to tell people to stop clear-cutting the forest, because they're just going to keep doing it, because they need to survive. If we want to change the situation that is taking place in the Amazons and places like Bosowas in Nicaragua, we have to change our consumption patterns. But I wouldn't have come to that conclusion if I hadn't seen both, if I hadn't seen on-the-ground stories, qualitative data, and the 20,000 feet above quantitative data. So my point here is that mixed methods research, using these two things together, is the best way to help us understand what's causing what. So in sociology and social sciences in general, we talk a great deal about correlation versus causation. Distinguishing between these two things, correlation and causation, is extremely important. Correlation does not necessarily mean causation. Now, for causation to exist, correlation must be present, but it is not sufficient to come to the conclusion that one thing is causing another. Let me give you a very clear classic example. When people walk into their first semester of introductory statistics, one of the examples that is most often used is a relationship between homicides and ice cream. Now, if you look at this, if you go to inner cities in the United States or elsewhere around the world, ice cream sales peak during the summer, and so do homicides. And so it might seem, because those two things correlate together, that homicide rates are being caused by ice cream sales. And you might be able to come up with an actual story here. You might go, well, maybe it's the fact that as people go out to buy ice cream, they become aggressive because they want their ice cream first. And so they're more likely to kill their neighbor so that they can get their ice cream, right? So you could come up with an explanation to try and understand those numbers. Now, the actual explanation for why those two numbers correlate together has to do with a third variable, an outside variable, something else that helps us understand these things. And that outside variable is the temperature, right? When it is warmer, people go outside more frequently. If people go outside more frequently, they're more likely to come in contact with each other. And if they come into contact with each other, they're more likely to have disagreements. And the more disagreements that people have, the more likely it is that those disagreements turn violent. And for every violent encounter, the possibility of one person dying as a result of it goes up. And so in the winter we have less encounters, we have less likelihood of violence. In the summer we have more encounters, the likelihood of violence goes up. There's another third factor, right, that is influencing this, the temperature, right? It turns out that human beings are more frustratable in moments of high temperature. And so in moments in which it is hotter, we become more frustrated. So that also contributes to this. Ice cream has nothing to do with it. Temperature and people going outside explains homicides. It also, temperature explains ice cream sales. When it's warmer, people are more likely to buy ice cream. So ice cream trucks sell ice cream in the cities and other places on urban streets. And so those two things do correlate together, but we cannot come to the conclusion that ice cream sales actually cause homicides to go up. That's a dubious or spurious relationship. When there's a relationship between two things that moves together and it is not an actual causal relationship, like ice cream and homicide rates, we refer to that as a spurious relationship. Now, an actual causal relationship is one like what I just described, right? When we think about the reason for deforestation across Nicaragua, Peru, Bolivia, different parts of the Amazons, what's really going on, what's really causing it, the root cause, is the consumption patterns of people in the United States combined with the need to survive on the ground for people that have very limited resources. Those are the causes, right? And so if we want to solve a problem, we have to figure out what the causes are first. Once we figure out what the causes are, we can think about policies that would change the situation. And so if what we're seeing in the rainforest is people are decimating the forest because they don't have enough to survive on, and the only thing they can do to survive is decimate the forest and create cattle that they can then sell, right? Or to breed cattle and then they can sell that. What we would have to do is come up with an alternative income source for those individuals. We would also, so that's at the heart of the issue. Now, what we would also have to do is recognize that consumption patterns in the United States are related to the decimation of the Amazon, and virgin forest everywhere. And so we would have to shift our consumption patterns away from hardwoods and towards something else, hopefully something else much more sustainable. Okay, so hopefully this has been useful. Hopefully you have a better idea of what systematic analysis means, and hopefully you're ready to dive into thinking about some of these things through your own projects, and hopefully informing your local politicians and those individuals that are power brokers within your community so that they make decisions that is based on data and informs policy moving forward in a progressive way.